morning, everybody, and welcome to Life Chats with Maggie and Bunny. I'm Maggie.
And I'm Bunny.
Today, we have a special guest with us today, and his name is Gavin Ashley, and he has the Life Reboot. What we'd like to start with first is Bunny and I met Gavin a number of years ago, and it was quite a remarkable seminar that we went to. And so we're going to share a little bit about how we met him and what spoke to us then. And then we're going to allow him to talk about what he's doing now, because it is a little bit different. The thing that comes to mind for me, the first time I met you, Gavin, was you talked to me about finding neutral. And that was just powerful and life-changing, that things don't have to be one way or another. There can be a neutral, and neutral's okay too. And that wasn't something that I had ever heard of in my life. And it stuck with me. And I use it a lot now still of, you know, I don't have to like it. I don't have to dislike it. I can just be neutral.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And that was pretty powerful to me. And it really was life changing, because lots of times we get stuck in situations because we're trying to find solutions where there may not be any. And not everything needs a solution. Some things can just remain neutral. And if you can get yourself to that place of neutral in your life, it removes a lot of anxiety and it removes a lot of turmoil. So, buddy, what about you? What did you find in that seminar?
So for me, I learned about the neutral thing after on the ride home in the car. But what my biggest impact, it was actually very funny because it was in June of 2019. So it was pretty fresh into me coming into learning about the spiritual world and that sort of stuff. And I remember, Gavin, when you took us into the private room for the private like one-on-one session, and you asked me, what do you think is, your limiting belief? What do you think is blocking you? What do you think something is? And I said something, but I said, I'm trying to, and then I said, oh, wait, I am doing it. And then you said, oh, they got you already. And I was like, what? And you were like, the spiritual community, like the way that you're talking and that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, it was like you zoomed right in like seconds of meeting you. And it was like, that was incredible to me. That was such a like, I was like, oh, okay, so there is something else. And because I don't know, like many people, when you first come into this spiritual awakening or spiritual, you're coming into the spiritual world, you want to do it right. You want to follow the rules. You want to do the things. And now, 5 years later, I realize there really isn't any rules. There aren't a lot of rules. There's a lot more of just listening to yourself and doing what it is that you're supposed to do. Oh, Bean wants to talk. So, but go ahead and share maybe Gavin of, some of that stuff or what you're doing now.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for sharing that, both of you guys. And just on the neutrality front, it was a really powerful teaching, I found, because some people kind of think, oh, if you're going to neutralize something, is it going to be that I don't have any feelings or emotions? And the reality is not necessarily, not even 100% true, because what's really happening is you're neutralizing something, but you actually can be in the best place possible to
Mm-hmm.
affect change in that situation or help other people, you know,
Yeah.
and you're in this place of neutrality, right? So it actually involves a lot of emotion, like on the positive front, and a lot of passion, but it's really neutralizing the negatives and neutralizing the negative experiences and negative thoughts, so you can come from that place of neutrality. But I just want to really be clear with everybody, because sometimes they think, oh, is that going to mean I'm going to be numbed out, or I'm just not
Mm-hmm.
going to any emotions? And that's not true.
Right.
um, so that was the first thing I wanted to say. And yeah, so since 2019, since I met you guys, I've gone through a lot of upgrades within myself, and really trying to dig deeper on the reasons why people are sick, mentally and physically. But I really started to go more into the physical, which is technically connected to the emotional, anyways, as we know. But what I realized too was that people were experiencing something that they had never experienced before, mostly because of COVID. and the world changing so much, right? So what I noticed was happening, although it was again a lot of like a lot of emotional stuff, a lot of programming, and then their bodies started to break down sort of at a faster rate, and there could be various reasons why that was happening, but it doesn't really matter. It was the point was I found that the system, so when I talk about the system, because I have that computer background,
Mhm.
and our brains are like this computer, basically people were becoming overloaded and overwhelmed, and their systems were maxing out. So the
Mm.
big aha moment, which I'm so excited to share with you guys today, is this realization that our computer system, which is our brain, doesn't have unlimited capacity. There is a limit to how much information we can store in the brain. And so if we look at science and we look at, what they're looking at with regards to the brain and neural pathways and stuff, I think a lot of people think this is like this infinite storage unit. But from my experience, it wasn't the case. So
Mm.
I was trying to figure out like what's going on here. Like pretty much 95+% of people that I speak to on a daily basis are basically hitting their max out point, you know. So I wanted to understand that further, right? So as I dug deeper into that, I realized that the brain was actually running out of space, you know.
Mm.
And in this one case, just to illustrate this point, the person had all this pain along their frontal lobes, like extreme pain, like as if they're under pressure. So when I ran this updated process, which essentially it's kind of like closing the tabs on your browser.
Mm.
Sometimes too many tabs open. And again, like a computer, it starts to crash because the memory, you run out of memory. So this is happening with the brain. And so when I ran that process, the pain in the forehead went away. Nobody could solve that issue. Because again, the doctors and the scans and whatnot are not looking at it as an issue of too much information. So why that is really, really important and why it's so exciting to understand that is if you look at, say, trauma, past experiences, negative experiences, the stuff that I talked about previously, and in the spiritual new age world, that's what we talk about a lot. We talk about
Yeah.
trauma. What I started to realize is like, wait a second, although that is still the case, obviously, um, it goes far beyond that in terms of a lot more data, that is
Mm.
going into the brain. And so when I started looking at social media, when I started looking at our food, when I started looking at all of this, I call it information that is going through our senses. So our eyes, our ears, our mouth, our nose, all of this, like the chemical,
Yeah.
everything is showing up in the system as information. So this really started to, I think, accelerate. If we look back 20 years to the smartphone and the information age and the computer age, so that has just added to it. So if you have a situation where somebody is, say, dealing with a lot of trauma, that's one aspect, but then you almost like, compound the situation, exponentially because now you're loading in all this information from, say, your smartphone, from the information overload that's occurring, from all these other sources. So my work essentially expanded into all of these different possibilities of what could be really happening because essentially what is happening is when the body and the mind is getting overloaded, it's breaking down faster.
Mhm.
Okay.
That information is causing the brain and the body to accelerate with its aging and accelerate with things like chronic pain and inflammation and then the other major diseases that start to come after that. Because sort of inflammation is kind of like the starting point of a lot of diseases, and so I was trying to trace that back too. What's causing so much inflammation of the body? And I realized that was too much information. So
Right.
as we
Mhm.
get more information, we get inflammation
Yeah.
and the body and the digestive system and the organs get overloaded.
Right.
Yeah, so that was my big reveal for myself, and I started to have to debug the system and figure out, okay, what is happening and how can I fix that?
Yeah. I always find it interesting correlation of like what your experience in like traditional conventional work beforehand where you were working with computers and how like it translates into, and I find that with so many people when they they started, traditional conventional stuff, and then they have like a spiritual, like, a moment where the door opens and they're like, hey, there's more to this, and that works that. Now, when, I know way back when, like, I have a little bit of computer background too. So way back when we used to do things like defrag our computer and like do all these things and sort things out. And, when as your memory is getting full, you would like delete some files and that sort of thing. Is that what you do? Like, what is it exactly that you do to help the people when you find that they have too much information?
Oh, that's really good. That's a really good question. And so that was the next project for me. Okay, like what do I do about the fact that we have too much information? And just to add a second point to this, what I wanted to do also is sort of bring this work to more of a mainstream audience, you know.
Okay.
So sometimes when we go spiritual new age, we can go into these very esoteric realms, and that's
Right.
totally fine. There is an audience for that.
Hmm.
But if we want to get to the masses, even though it's still outside of the buck of conventional medicine, we're getting there a little bit closer by explaining it more from a scientific
Right.
standpoint. Right? And the
Hmm.
scientific standpoint is that's your brain, that's your neural pathways, and they're overloaded. And your brain's like a computer, right? What I needed to do next was I needed to enhance my process of neutralizing this emotion because what is essentially happening is the excess emotion, say like a negative emotion about a particular situation. Let's say somebody just had a breakup, of a
Hmm.
relationship or a marriage. What we will do as humans is we will attach all of this meaning to that situation. What that means, rejection, he or she doesn't love me anymore. I'm going to be all alone. I'm going to die alone. This is how the human brain, operates from this place of, attaching, these negative experiences and these meanings and these assumptions. And all of that negative thought forms creates takes up the space, right? So when I run that process and I neutralize, that negative emotion, what ends up happening is people say, "Well, my mind feels a lot more free. I obviously feel lighter, and I feel neutral about it." But the other phenomenon that started happening was people started to feel like they had more space in their brain
Hmm.
you know and I think that came from a place of essentially closing out these taps because what's happening is when you have that negative emotion about a situation and you've made meaning about something, it's kind of like that information is active in the brain. So when that information is currently active, it's taking up space. It's like that opening a tab on the browser.
Hmm.
But the reality of the situation is we don't necessarily need that information to be active, but the
Right.
brain doesn't know how to close it down. If it
Hmm.
did, it would be fine. But it doesn't do that, and I wouldn't have a job and I would be happy because humanity would probably be better off. But that's
Yeah.
not the reality. The reality is the brain keeps this information active. I think that's because the brain is saying, in case that situation happens again, I gotta be aware,
Right.
in case I get
Hmm.
dumped again, I gotta make sure that information's active. But again, not necessary. And the unfortunate part is sometimes people were coming to me 10 years later,
Right.
um, with that same situation maybe or other difficult situations, and it was like they didn't know how to close that information out. They didn't know how to remove that negative experience, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
so what I found was it was running 24/7 endlessly. So you can imagine that negative experience running continuously. That's a huge problem, right? And
Yeah.
that problem um, doesn't go away on its own, right? And so sometimes we have this thought, oh, like time heals wounds and all that stuff. But the reality is, I haven't had that experience. Maybe it softens a little bit, or you don't have the sting of it. It's not as bad. But generally speaking, people are running these programs and these negative experiences continuously, right? So, anyways, I come in with my process. I start closing out the tabs. I start neutralizing it. Then I ask my client, "How do you feel?" And they feel like either they hadn't thought about it, it hadn't come up in their mind, or they completely forgot. In some cases, they could not picture the person
Mm.
for, going back to that relationship example, right? They could not picture the individual further, any further. Now, that's not necessarily something that everybody wants. but I kind of started dubbing it. It's like this face erase process, right? Where you
Hmm.
can, where the person wouldn't necessarily see that individual's face. But that was a sign that we were getting extremely neutral results on those particular situations. And again, now the brain is not as cluttered as it was previously, right? So how exciting is that is, we're in our house and we're cleaning up spring cleaning and fall cleaning and we're
Yeah.
cleaning our cars and we're, cleaning our kitchen, but we're never cleaning this. We're never getting rid of any information
Yeah.
from our brain.
Hmm.
We're just allowing it. It's like imagine your smartphone. You never delete anything off your smartphone. What's going to happen? It's going to crash. It's
Yeah.
going to be really bad. Um, so now we have a mechanism to do that for the human brain,
Hmm.
and that's so exciting.
That
It
is.
does sound exciting. I was thinking as you were talking about that, I deal a lot with grief, people who are suffering from grief because I work with the dying and their families. And I can see that being helpful there because oftentimes I find when people are experiencing in depth grief, their system does crash and they don't see any way out of that. And part of what I do in that is tell them you're having a reboot now. Just you're letting yourself start over and you're creating a new life within that circle of grief. And it makes sense what you're talking about because we often do need a reboot. I used to joke with people, I turned 65 this year and I said I need a control alt delete button that gets rid of things I don't need that I've picked up because with this technology, you know, in my lifetime, microwaves were supposed to make things easier for us. You know, smartphones were supposed to make things easier. But all of those things that were supposed to make our life easier ended up causing more stress because you have much more time to do more things. So, nobody just sits down and talks on the phone or sits down and does one thing. You're doing 17 things at a time. So all those things that were created to make our life easier made it more complicated
100%.
if we allow it.
Yeah.
If we allow it.
And that is part of the issue. Yes, people are allowing it, but I find some of these technologies, especially the phone, it's becoming an addiction. So a lot of people I talk to, they're scrolling a lot, you know, and I equate this to um, eating food whole without chewing.
Mm.
That's what it's like for your brain because if you watch a video for 10 seconds and then you watch another one for 10 seconds, then you watch another one for 10 seconds, and each video is on a different topic, the brain's kind of goes like a little bit like scrambled,
Yeah.
because it can't process the information because it's coming at it too quickly. And then it never really finished processing the last one and then it's on to the next one. So
Yeah.
people will tell me, yeah, I couldn't concentrate or focus, for hours after I was on TikTok for 30 minutes, the other day or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe digital detox is necessary, but what are you going to do with all that information that you took in that you don't really need? It's not really useful, you don't use it. The only exception to that rule is if somebody takes a course or learns a skill through maybe watching something and then goes out and uses that skill and then sort of like the brain will see that information as useful and then it gets cataloged, right?
Hmm.
The other type of information is it's sitting out there in the open, not being utilized, right?
Yeah.
So that's the open tab, that's not being processed correctly.
Or we have to learn how to empty our trash.
Yeah.
Really, yeah. No. And
And
we
I
don't know how to
do
do that.
take myself, I take digital reboots all the time. And I'll go away for days at a time and tell people, unless someone's dying, you're not going to get me. So you better leave a message because I'll turn my phone right off. And people will end up saying to me, especially with what I do, my phone's off a lot anyway, but people will send me a message. Did you forget to turn your phone back on? Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't care.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
I
That is
know.
very rare. People are not doing that. It's a digital detox, but
Yeah.
I
you
think
know,
it's
Well, we've
I think
talked
it's
about
absolutely necessary.
even the people like you have notifications on your phone and it's a constant like looking at your phone and like I said, we both have said, like if you send us a message on Messenger, we're not going to know until we go on Messenger to see if we have any messages. Like because I don't want to be bombarded with notifications, and because like you said, it does become like an addiction of I have to check, like I have to be in the know, I have to always be checking. And
Yeah.
like some of the, and I understand it's the apps trying to get you to that, but yeah, so it does make a lot of sense. I know I do spend a lot of time on TikTok, and I do grab a lot of information. um yeah, and I do, like Maggie has done. I actually have left like social media for a week once and nobody even noticed. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh God.
And you probably feel better.
I did feel
Your brain
better,
will feel
yeah.
better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but and my phone does let me know. I have a Samsung, so it does let me know my weekly report and how much time I've spent on apps and stuff, and it's like, whoa, like I didn't
I know,
realize
scary.
I was spending so much time. But
I
but
mean,
yeah,
I like even in my case, I have to use the phone. I'm not saying people
yeah.
don't use their phone, and I probably can't get away from it entirely because that's how you communicate with people. But it's all about limiting, the screen
Hmm.
time. And with my tools, we can actually clean up that information. So
Yeah.
I think I think what's exciting is, it's not just trauma, although that's a big piece of it. But sometimes we can kind of get stuck in that conversation too. And it's like something you read, you know, a week ago and it's still stuck in your brain. And your brain essentially like it's almost like it removes or takes away some of the brain power
Mm.
because it's processing this other information, right? So that's where it tends to be more problematic, right? So if we want to have focus and concentration, if we want to have a lot of brain power and be able to execute on tasks and get things done efficiently with our minds, we can't do it with all that other information in there, right?
Right.
So is that because you fell off your bike at age 3? Probably not. That could be an issue, but
Yeah.
not right now. And so sometimes I hear about these people doing experiences like, hey, I went to a retreat and we dug into our lifetimes of, 50 lifetimes, and we did early childhood work, and we dig into all these emotions and stuff. And I totally get it. And some of that is going to definitely be an issue. But the reality is, what are we dealing with right now? And how can we be present to what is actually happening right now? And so what I ended up doing, even before I met you guys, is I found myself always going into the past. I
Mm.
had read Eckhart Tolle. I had wanted to be in the now. I
Hmm.
wanted to be in the moment, but most of the time I was in the past trying to figure out what happened to me when I was 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years old. So that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is, as spiritual seekers, as personal development gurus and action seekers for all of this work, we want to be mindful that we're not spending too much time in the past, and it's like what are we dealing with in the present moment? Because I think it can kind of become as a distraction. And what
Hmm.
I found too is that if I wake up this morning and I'm having an emotional disturbance, there's something bothering me, and I work with what's in the now moment, I'm probably working on something from my past. It's probably not something that happened in the moment, right?
Right.
But I'm not going into the past and digging up all this trash, right? I'm dealing with the moment, and then the brain knows all of the different intersecting points of where the origination from that. So I might be dealing with something at age 3, but really I'm staying in the moment, to heal whatever's coming up in this moment. And I know for myself, I literally spent 5 years living in my past, trying to heal all of my past, and I was not in the moment. I was not living in the now.
Hmm.
And the irony was just staring me in the face. I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is important to be living in the now. And because if you go into the past too much, that can cause you depression. If you go into the future too much, that causes anxiety. Being in the now, in this now moment, and in my own practice of mindfulness, you are taught and practice living in the now every minute of every day because the now is all that matters.
Right.
Yes, there might be times where you have to go to the past or think about the future. Yes, we have to think about the future and planning for retirement and all of that kind of stuff. But we don't forget about now while we're thinking of that.
Well,
And this,
I think where some of the problem came in was a lot of us, that's how we were trained. We were trained, to go into our past because we had to figure out what happened,
Mhm.
in these early ages. And I agree that a lot of our trauma probably comes between age 0 and 7. It's probably true. But yeah, I find like a lot of modalities and a lot of healing work was all about always going back to that,
Yeah.
and so I just spent so much time there, and
You
yeah, and it
miss
was
this moment.
exactly right. But
Yeah.
again, I just thought it was so ironic. I thought, wow, I can't believe I did that.
Well, I mean, for me, I know for me personally, I'm a QHHT practitioner, so I do past lives and past life regressions and stuff like that. I also, energy healer, soul coach, all that stuff. And currently on a journey of um it's kind of like it's feeling your emotions in your body and allowing them so staying out of the REELs, so the reels in your mind and moving out of your mind and going into the body and feeling the emotions and allowing because emotions last it depends on who you listen to, either 17 to 90 seconds when you let them process through and don't hold on to them with a story. So
Yeah.
it's so yeah, so it's like so there is a bunch. I actually think that all of these, like all of the things we talked about, with what you're doing, with what Maggie mentioned about mindfulness, which I've also done with John Shearer, and with the emotional stuff, and even the stuff that happened, the traumas that happened to us when we were kids and stuff, that more just kind of creates our beliefs and our conditioning and programming that we might not know about, like for the triggers. And that's kind of where, from what I understand, how that affects us in the way that I'm learning. I just am excited because there are so many new ways coming out. Like even what you're talking about, I have never heard anybody else talk about doing something like this in this way. And and even the emotional stuff that I'm on board with is also it's all like elevating a little bit more of what it is that we're doing and taking all the parts. And so I would like to remind our listeners today that if there is something that they like do like to do and that, you can also do that as well in combination with, what it is that you're doing, right, Gavin? Like
Hmm.
Oh,
like
yeah.
yeah, like
Well, that's
so
It's
and
not
that's
either
where
or.
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of a good segue into this whole Life Reboot thing, which is my new website. And the reason
mhm,
why I went to Life Reboot is because I realized that I was dealing more with like more all-encompassing
right,
information rather than just belief. So if you look at my website previous, which is the belief reset, which was really awesome for the period of time that I used it,
right,
but it was really focused on our belief systems, which is important,
yeah,
right? But again, if we want to shift into like, okay, we're shifting the mindset and we're looking at all the aspects, and then we're getting into the health, and we want to see, what's happening with us physically, like why are we aging at an
mhm,
accelerated pace, then we got to look at it more all encompassing, right? So that's where the life reboot came from.
right, yeah,
And I think it's even more important in where our world is now because we see things on a totally different scale than we ever did before.
mhm,
Everything that is going on all over the world is in front of us. It's whether it's through social media, whether it's through news media, whether it's through wherever, everything is affecting all of us. Where, when I was in my 20s, I didn't know what was going on in the other sides of the world. You were oblivious to it. Where now I think so many people are holding on to so much grief, sorrow, trauma, despair, anxiety because of what they see all over the world that isn't theirs. And it's kind of like you said, their brain is taking all that in and it's all getting scattered because what can I do about it? And I think I'm very excited about what you're talking about because at this time in our world, people need a life reboot and they
yeah,
need to look at shifting things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with social media because now we can get all this information, from all these different parts of the world. And then, yeah, I notice when I see the comments field, especially, I can see people are taking on these thoughts, feelings, and emotions from
Mm-hmm.
these experiences, right? And then they're holding it in their field. And I tell you, it's not good,
yeah,
And when
because
you look at
so
it, like you
common.
said about the brain, if the brain is like a big file folder, in my mind's eye, what I see is all kinds of files are hanging out of that file folder now because all of that stuff that's gone in there doesn't have a compartment.
And that's what
Everything,
I'm essentially doing. I'm filing it away in the
yeah.
brain.
And that's pretty exciting because I think, especially now in this day and age, people need that. They need to know how to sort stuff out because there's too much going on for most people. Then, if you add in some significant life trauma, like a breakup or a death or something, that kind of sends you over the edge.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
because you're already
that's where,
maxed out. I mean, if you have a lot of trauma, you're maxed out, and then you add all this stuff into it, right? And so what's so fascinating about this, and I never expected this to happen, but I only started realizing as I started to clean up my own data. My senses, so we have the different six senses, and well, some people say seven. I think it's somewhere in that range, but essentially, like these senses started to enhance. I'll give you an example. Like I would go outside, and when I'm looking at things through my eyes, of course, things look brighter. And I thought, oh, what's going on there? Right? It's like, okay, the sun's shining, but I mean, the colors look more rich,
yeah.
right? And then I'm listening to some music or have the TV on, and I had to turn it down. I was like my hearing's better. Like I didn't understand what was happening. Or I went in the shower and I could feel the water more on my skin. I thought it was even more strange, So I realized that all of this overload was actually dulling my senses,
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I had spoken to some people who are like more advanced age, and they describe their experiences more like they're the when they look outside or they're looking at something, it's more like dim or it's more like grayscale,
Mm.
where the colors are not there anymore. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was really fascinating. So what I realized was all of this information was overloading all of their senses, and then our experience of life was totally different because we had too much information in our eyes, too much information in our ears, too much, information in all these senses. We couldn't smell as good anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Smell things.
So my
You know.
question to you now is, how do you get this out into the world? Do you do this only through one-on-one with people? Do you do through workshops? Do you have a like a Zoom class? Do you do things out in public? How are you planning to do this? Because it's very exciting to me, and I would love to be involved in it at some point. And I
Yeah.
want our listeners to hear about how they can partake of this because it sounds fabulous.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, one of the main ways is I put people on what I call the 30-day program, and they can do 60, 90, however many days they want. But essentially, you're running the process every day, for that 30 or 60 or 90 days. And so the reason why I'm doing that instead of the traditional like, hey, let's sit on the phone for an hour and run a process and clean up some trauma, it just wasn't enough because again, we have so much data, right? So during waking hours, I can run the process like a computer program. So it's like, going back to that computer days, kind of like, double clicking on an icon on your desktop and a program just runs. So we run that program while you're awake. And then when you're sleeping, your brain just does its automatic updating process. You have these crazy dreams. So everybody be warned, you're going to have some really interesting, vivid dreams, as your brain goes through that update. And then you do that for 30 days and then you see how you feel. And when I do the phone calls with people, it's kind of just an update and we talk about again present moment, like what do you need help with right now today, and then again the brain will figure out all the trauma from the past, so you will really don't talk about it. But somebody might say, oh, I've been raped or sexual abuse, so we just kind of open up Pandora's box a little bit. We run the process, we clean up those bits, and then essentially we run the process, as quickly as possible for those 30 days, right? So that's number one. I call it your done for you service, right? Someone does it for you. What I completed recently was an 8 week um, course where people can learn to do it themselves. And so we run the processes instead of doing it from me. It's essentially do it yourself service. So for some people who really want to learn that and they really want to clean up their brain on a regular basis. So it's kind of like a membership. So it's kind of like Netflix membership, right, where you get access to all this content. In this case, you get access to all this technology that essentially, cleans up the brain, declutters the brain, and so you got the component of cleaning up the trauma, and healing the body. but then you're decluttering, closing tabs, the whole nine
Hmm.
yards. So that's kind of how that works. So people have access to me basically for 30 days. They'll have access to text message. We'll have a weekly phone call. You could do bi-weekly or you can do just text message. There's different packages, but essentially it's that 30 days, which is really, really necessary for us to do some major, major cleanup. And then, yeah, people can learn about it. That's more new. So I'm excited to teach people how to do this themselves.
Yeah. And do they find out about that all through your website, or how do they
So right
find out
now,
how to do this?
yeah, so right now, just for the one-on-ones, but I am putting together some materials for the mentoring course. But anybody who reaches out to me through the website, they can find out more information if they want to learn how to do that. But I always suggest people, try the 30 days and see how it feels, and you experience like what it's like to actually have your brain function normally, like the way it was supposed to, right? Probably the way it was when we were kids. We just don't remember what that's like.
Mhm.
Like
But
I have a little girl. She's like 4 years old, and she just runs and plays, and she's doesn't have a care in the world, and her brain is so sharp, and because that's how we were back then.
yeah.
That's how our brain operated. So we're taking you back to that place. So once you experience that, then you might be like, oh, I need to figure out how I can do this on my friends and family.
Oh, that's really cool. So just because there are so many things out there, this is, as far as I know, it's something new. I don't know if you're in this world. Have you heard of other people doing this? Because I was going to say, some people, especially for something that's new, how quickly have you been seeing your clients having, like, does it take the first 30 days before they're like actually seeing results, or are they seeing results sooner, like after a week
Yeah.
or 2 weeks, and like are like what's kind of the feedback you're getting
Yeah,
so
well,
far?
it will depend on the individual, but definitely, like I see, some people have noticed differences within the first couple of hours.
Oh wow.
They start closing out tabs. But I would say more average is like within the first week,
Right.
right? And then when you get to, I would say generally like 30 days, you're kind of just into the major backlog. And
Right.
then 60 and 90 days, you start to have more accelerated results, even
Hmm.
definitely in the third month, because you're now um, catching some momentum,
Right.
because you've cleaned up a bulk of stuff and now you're getting to some of the deeper layers,
Right.
in the memory system. So it's kind of a sliding scale, but I would say a majority of people within the first week, they notice something significantly different about how their brain operates and how it works,
Right.
and they feel a lot lighter. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to explain even for your individual self, like what is actually am I feeling? And if I describe it as do you feel lighter and do you feel like you can think more clearly, that's generally yes, I got that, because sometimes people have trouble relating to like what is it that I feel different. But I
Right.
think lighter and clear is the two very stark, remarkable results that they can see from that.
Right.
Hmm.
Okay.
I
As soon
remember
as you
back
start
as you're,
closing tabs, then right away you're gonna,
yeah,
you're just gonna function better, right? I think it's
Yeah.
still
I remember back in my life at a time when I first was learning about mindfulness, and that came about because I was seeing a therapist for something I was going through. And when I went in to talk to them, they said, "Well, how do you feel?" And I said, "I feel like I am in the spin cycle of a washing machine and I'm stuck on spin." And when you're talking now, that brought me back to that. Like this was a number of years ago, but that just brought me back to that because I think many times people do feel like they're on the spin cycle and everything is going too fast and you can't get off. You can't get it to slow down and stop. And what I'm kind of feeling and hearing from what you're saying is you stop the spin.
well, I call that there's a word for it. I call it memory loops. And people are looping a lot. Not that
Yeah.
they're loopy, I don't mean like that, but the memory loop, it'll play on a tape. So
Yeah.
so maybe days later after something happened, you'll hear your brain like is still thinking about what that person said, you know. And in reality, it's like, why do we care what that person says, or it's their opinion, or whatever? It doesn't matter, right? But we
Yeah.
make meaning out of it, and then your brain will. present it again because it technically wants you to heal it. It wants you to let go of it. It wants you to sort of recognize, like, hey, did you hear what that person said? Right? And you're like, yeah, I got it, right? And it's like, okay, repeat, repeat. That's quite annoying. I always thought that was very like, why is the brain doing that? So I wanted to figure out like, how do we stop that looping? And it's really, or somebody like a lot of people tell me at late at night or in the middle of the night when they
Mm.
wake up, their mind is like another word I would use is brain chatter.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there was something I heard the other day. Oh, somebody said head trash. I kind of like that one too. Um, so we got a lot of brain chatter, head trash, looping going down, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
again, the brain is just trying to tell you, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember that? Do you remember when that person said that? So we basically like cutting the loop, just
Hmm.
done. And then so the most crazy thing is when I'll say to person because I remember what they said the previous call. I'll say, okay, so how do you feel about that situation? Oh, I haven't even thought about it. What do you mean? Like they don't even remember that they stopped thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's when you know it really worked
Yeah.
because they can't remember anything at all.
Yeah, that's
It's kind
really
of like
cool.
sometimes people have like they'll have back pain or neck pain and I was like, how's your back? Oh, gone. I didn't even know it was gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So, to our listeners today, we invite you to reach out to Gavin and find out more about this program if it's something that is resonating with you. It certainly is exciting to hear about, and
Sure.
we're excited to share it with you because, it's something that many of us get stuck in that loop. And so, if this man can find a way to help you through that, by all means, because I can tell you from experience what he taught about neutrality. Wow. So if this is even a tiny bit like that, it is mind blowing and it does help you in your everyday life. It's not just, smoke in the air. It
Yeah.
really does change your life. So for all of us, Bunny, do you have any last thoughts?
But really just asking Gavin, how can people reach you? I know that they can reach out to your website, but how else, like, is there any other way that they could reach you or
they can also send an email at Gavin at the Belief Reset, or no, sorry, Gavin at thebeliefreset.com. That's it.
perfect?
And so, yeah, they can send those emails, or yeah, the website is probably the easiest way. And you can book a 20-minute free consultation. In that 20 minutes, I can tell people exactly what's blocking them from
Right.
their success, what limiting beliefs they have, memories, experiences, or it could just be the overwhelm. So I can actually diagnose that on the phone, or if they have any physical disturbances, I can tell them what is actually affecting the physical disturbance, like from the emotional spectrum. So everybody gets a free complimentary call and get more information and a live reading on the
That's
call.
cool. That's really cool because, like,
Wow.
I can tell you, like I said, it was like minutes, seconds after
Yeah.
meeting you that you're like,
Yep.
oh, that it was like pretty cool. So I know the effectiveness of that, and like, even the neutral thing that Maggie shared with me in the car, and I also had not considered that option, and it helped me actually even in like, so that's the stuff. Even if somebody is like not sure about the stuff that you're doing, if they give it a shot and then it can even open you up to other things. I kind of call it the ladder rungs. So, some ladder rungs might be a little bit too high for somebody to reach. And so if this is a ladder rung they need to reach the next step in their evolution, that would be helpful too. That would be great. So,
Oh, that's
uh
awesome.
yeah.
So
I
thank
really
you so
appreciate
much,
it.
Gavin, for
Thank you so much.
coming on our program today and talking with us about this. We appreciate your time.
Thank
And
you for
yeah,
having me.
thank you.
Awesome to be here.
And so, just for all of our listeners and anybody else, if you want to reach out, if you want to be on our podcast, if you want to have us as guests on your podcast, reach out to us at aboveandbeyond at gmail.com and our website at aboveandbeyond.com, our Facebook page, TikTok, all Spotify, everywhere you can find us. And we'll hear more from Gavin, I'm sure, in the future.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much,
much,
guys.
everybody. Have a great day. Bye.